Alright, as it stands, our game project is pretty much complete. So in this lesson, what we'll be doing is exporting our 3D platformer game project out of Godot to a standard playable by pretty much anyone on a Windows computer, a standard Windows application, in other words, a standalone game. But first, inside of Godot, we're going to talk about resolution and scaling, so our game looks right and is the right size on the end user screen. Also in this lesson, I'll be showing you how you can give your exported Windows game a custom icon. So your program, your exe, will have your own logo or icon and not just Godot's icon. But let's go ahead and jump in. The first thing I need to do is actually make sure that my little character in my game has to collect the right number of coins to actually win. Right now, if I double click on my global.gd file, it'll open up and I can see that I still have it set to 2 coins that you have to collect to win the game, where I should delete that number and uncomment the real number, 30. There we go. The first thing we should set up before we export our game to a standalone Windows program is the size or the resolution of the actual game window. When I press play and my game launches, well, this window has a size and we never talked about it until this point. To change it, what I can do is go up to my project menu and go to project settings, where under the general tab, there is a section called display and there are window settings. If I go to my window settings, you can see here that my default viewport of my game when it's playing is 1152 pixels wide by 648 pixels. You can change these values to whatever you want within reason. I think that 1280 by 720 is a standard value that you'll often see with the game. Although if you change this resolution, I'll go ahead and change mine back. You will need to go back to your game menus, in other words, your title screen and your game over screen and your win screen, and you will need to reorganize them because you probably laid all the elements out, like the title and the picture and the button, to a screen size of the default, and so you'll end up seeing gray background when you don't intend to if you make your game window bigger. Okay? One thing you should also check out in your project settings is the stretch mode of your game window. Now, we're actually going to turn resizable off in a moment, but just to show you right now, if I play my game, you can see that if I'm on any game window, I can stretch out the window size and reveal things that the end user shouldn't see, like the default gray background. This isn't going to be such a big issue when you're actually playing the game in a game level in a 3D environment, because you'll just be scaling the actual viewport, but that comes with its own issues. If I go up to my project and project settings, what I should probably do is change my stretch mode. What I can do here is actually put my mouse over this mode section or the mode title and read a description of all the different types of stretch modes available, which are disabled, canvas items, and viewport. Those are the 3 options that I have here. If I go ahead and change the stretch mode from disabled to viewport, and then go ahead and close the project settings and then play my game, when I do this, you're going to notice that, yes, the game window is still scalable. However, when I grab the corner of my game window, we're not revealing any extra outside of what the end user should see. Instead, the content of the window scales with the size of the window. However, because of that scaling setting that we just chose, it's not scaling very well, or at least not for the purpose of this type of a game. If I go ahead and press play to view my game level, depending on how big I make my game window, you're going to notice a lot more pixelation in the way that the game looks. It's just not going to look very good. What's happening here is when I go ahead and choose that setting called viewport, well, it's drawing out my game in the size of window that I've chosen, but it's drawing the game at that resolution, and then when I scale the viewport, because the game was already drawn on the screen in its original resolution, well, those pixels just become stretched out, and the game doesn't actually gain any quality, and it'll actually look worse on your screen. Now, this viewport setting isn't all bad. If you're making a 2D pixel style game where you want to see the size of the original pixels but bigger, then this viewport stretch mode might be what you actually want. In our case, because we're making a 3D game, the better choice here is canvas items. I don't think this is a very good name, or at least it's not very self-explanatory, but if you choose this option and then go ahead and play your game, what you're going to notice is that in a 3D game level, you can scale your game window and it continues to look good because it's drawing the game at whatever resolution that you've set to with the size of your game window, so it still looks good. All that being said though, I think it's a better idea to actually change your project settings to not enable window resizing. So I'll go ahead and turn off this resizable option entirely. So now when I play my game, if I try to drag the corner of a window, it just doesn't work. Okay, so my game is fixed at this size. Perfect. With that out of the way, I think we're actually now ready to go ahead and export our game. To do that, you're going to go up to the project menu and select export. However, it turns out that Godot isn't all you need to export a game out of Godot. When you first downloaded Godot, you might have recognized that Godot itself is a very small program. It's only about a 50 megabyte download, which is very small. It turns out that to export from Godot, you need to download and install a package into Godot. Don't worry, it's easy. But this package, it includes all of the export templates that you need to actually export from Godot. To get this export templates package, what you need to do actually is go up to the editor menu and select Manage Export Templates. When you do that, you'll be presented with a little pop-up window here where you can go ahead and choose to download and install the current version of the export templates for your version of Godot. Now, there are different options to be able to download this package. You can choose from the best available mirror, which means that Godot itself will choose where to download it from, or you can choose one of the other options. I believe that the GitHub option is the best, so I'll choose that, and I'll go ahead and press download and install. When I do that, it'll actually download a file that's almost 800 megabytes, way bigger than the initial Godot program itself, and it'll install it for you. And that whole process took about 30 seconds, and we're done. Okay, I'll go ahead and close this window, and now if I go up to Project and Export, it'll give me this very plain looking window where I can choose what type of project preset I want to export to by going up to Add and choosing the type of device or operating system that I want to export to. In this case, in this lesson, we're talking about a Windows desktop application. So I'll choose Windows Desktop here, and it'll list for me the type of projects that I'm exporting to with basically one click down here in my left panel here. With this Windows Desktop option selected, over in the right side is where we have to choose all of our export options. And there are some very important things here. First off, when I export a Windows program or Windows game, that is a program file that ends with .exe. In Windows, that means it's an executable. However, your program logic is stored in this exe, but usually by default, all of your game assets are not. Like your game textures, the sound files, the fonts, all of those are going to be exported to a separate file, which Godot calls a .pck file. If you don't want to give people two files for your program, a .exe file and a separate pck file, you can actually embed the pck file into the exe file, which I like to do by clicking this little checkbox on for, under binary format, embed pck. And for simplicity's sake, we're going to say here that we're exporting the final version of our game, which means we're not going to need to do any testing of our game after this final export. So we're not going to have any debug options turned on, or we're going to turn them off by default. When you export your Godot game or a game from any game engine, it's common to go through a debug process after you've exported to make sure that it works perfectly, which is a good idea. However, I'm going to change this debug export console wrapper to no. We're not going to do any debugging, which means we don't need to launch our program with an extra debug window to test it out. We're going to turn that option off here. Okay. Next up, under the section called Application, is where we can fill out all the information about this game, like its current version, the company name of who made this game, which is you, the product name, the copyright, etc. I'll go ahead and quickly fill this out. Next up is this option for a program icon. But for Windows programs, it turns out that there's two separate places to add an icon. You can have one icon for your game program that appears up in the, I think it's called the header bar of a window. It's right here. In this case, it's a Godot icon. And that same icon actually appears down in your Windows taskbar when your program is running, or if you've pinned that program to your taskbar. The other kind of icon that a program can have is the actual program icon for the exe file. If I go ahead to my desktop, you can see that I have Godot here and it has the Godot icon. That's what I'm talking about. So there's actually two types of icons to add, and therefore I'm going to give you two different image files here to use for those two different types of icons. I'm going to go ahead and select and then right click on and copy those two image files. And then in my project folder, I'm going to go into my assets folder. And then here, I'm going to right click and say new folder, where I'm going to create a new folder specifically for the icons of my program. There we go. In that folder, I will go ahead and right click and paste those image files back into the Godot editor, and then I go back into my project export settings. If I want to choose that icon here under the application section, if I go ahead and click on this little folder icon to open up that image file, you can see that the type of files that are recognized for a program icon are ICO files, which are Windows icon files, PNG files, which are image files, which is what I gave you, WebPs and SVGs. It turns out though that for some reason in Godot and with Windows that only ICO files work in this case. Now I've just given you PNG image files. What we need is an ICO, a proper Windows icon that actually contains multiple resolutions of icons all in one file. How do we convert a PNG into one of these special icon files? Well, it turns out that there's a website called convertico.com. This website does exactly what you think it does. It lets you upload a PNG image from your computer and it converts it to an ICO file. What you need to do first, though, before you drag a file into this area of their website, is select the icon sizes that you want it to convert to. Down here in this section, just a little bit lower, you should select all of the available sizes of icons because Godot is quite picky. Godot has a list of sizes of icons that it requires you to have in your ICO file in order to successfully export your program at all from Godot. Godot is quite picky in that sense. Now, I will be giving you an exact list of the sizes of icons that you need to have in your ICO file a little bit later in this video, but just for now, just in case, select all of the available options. The next step is for you to upload your image that you want. You can click in this area of the screen, or you can drag. I'm going to go ahead and flip over to Windows, where on my desktop, I have those two images that I showed you earlier in this video, my different icon options. For this, the main program icon, I'm going to use the full body version of my little robot. So this image, I'll go ahead and drag it in right there, and it will convert my PNG to an ICO file with all of these sizes that I've already selected. So make sure you select all of the sizes down here first. If you would like this website to display your icon in the recently converted list webpage of everyone's publicly displayed icons, leave this checked or uncheck it before you upload your image to their web server. Okay, so we've got this ICO file ready to download. I'll press the download button. It'll download into my downloads folder. I'll go ahead and flip over into thumbnail view so you can see it nicely right there. What I'm going to do now is copy that and paste that into my project assets folder. So I'll right click on it and say copy. And now I'll go ahead and minimize everything to get back to my desktop where my project folder is right here. I'll go ahead and open that up in my assets folder right here. I'll go into that. There is an icons folder that we made earlier in this video. I'll go into my icons folder and right click and paste the ICO file right there. Now back into the Godot editor where I have this open a file dialog box because I've clicked next to icon in my export settings, this little folder icon here. In that assets folder, in my icons folder, there is now an ICO file that I just put there. Here it is. I'll open it up and that should actually work. The other type of icon isn't actually applied in the export settings at all, so I'm going to go ahead and close this window. It's done in your project settings. Under the application section here, under config, there is an option for your program icon. This does not require an ICO file, so I'll go ahead and navigate. I'll press a little folder icon button into my assets folder, into my icons folder, and I'll choose the other icon, the one that's just his shoulders up. Okay, so I'll select that one and press open, and then I can close my project settings, of course. Back up into project and export now, you're going to notice a problem, a warning that it's telling us about our program icon. In this case, Godot actually doesn't have the ability by itself to export a Windows exe file and then change that Windows exe file's icon to the ICO file that we specified here. How do we get Godot to actually export an exe with our custom icon? Well, it turns out that you need a separate program, which is very, very easy to use and tell Godot about, called rcedit. So what I'll actually do here is flip back over to my web browser, where I'm going to do a Google search for Godot Icon Windows Export. When I do that, hopefully the very first result that you'll get here is the official Godot docs webpage on changing the application icon for Windows. If you go to this page, which I recommend that you actually do for yourself, it'll tell you all about exporting a Windows program with a custom icon. Now, they have a warning here about the ICO file. I mentioned this a few minutes ago when I talked about exporting multiple sizes in your ICO file. These are the sizes here: 16 by 16, 32 by 32, 48 by 48, 64, 128, and 256. Those are the sizes that you need to have in your ICO file in order for it to work with Godot. But more importantly, you need a separate program called rcedit. If I keep scrolling down here, there's actually another warning about what we've actually done. We have embedded our PCK file into our exe file to make our program more easy for anyone to run by just having one exe and not a separate PCK resources file. If you do that, it turns out that rcedit might have problems changing your program's icon while keeping the PCK embedded in your exe. So watch out for that. It has not been a problem for me lately, but there you go. Down here, there is a link. In fact, if you just search, I'll press Control F on my keyboard in a web browser that does a search on your current page. If I do a search for rcedit, it'll find it for me here, and I'll just press a little down arrow here to keep searching, and it'll eventually find me, and I think it found it here. It says, before selecting it, your icon in the export options, you will need to install an extra tool called rcedit. You can download it from here. So I'll go ahead and click on this link, which will take me over to GitHub, the page for rcedit on GitHub. And I can go ahead and download rcedit, in my case, x64 from my computer. I'll click on that. It'll download to my downloads folder, where I can go ahead and take that exe of rcedit, and I'm going to actually cut it, and I'm going to put it on my desktop right next to Godot. I don't actually know if you need to put rcedit right beside Godot, because we're going to tell Godot in a moment where rcedit is. In my case, it just makes things easier to put things on my desktop. So I'll paste rcedit here on my desktop. There it is. Back into Godot now, I need to tell Godot where rcedit is. That is done in our editor settings. So I'll go under editor and editor settings, and I believe it's down on the sidebar under the section called export and windows. On this page, I can point to rcedit. So I'll go ahead and click the little folder icon, and then on my desktop, so I'll go up a folder. On my desktop, it's right here, rcedit-x64.exe. I'll select that file. There we go. Now Godot should be able to use this program to modify our exe when we export it with our custom icon that we've already specified. Okay. So I think we're almost ready to actually export. If I go up to project and export, I think we have set up all of the changes that we need to have made. If I go to export project now, it'll let me choose where I want to save my exe file. In my case, I'm not going to put it in my project folder, so I'll press up to go up one folder right to my desktop. And do I want to call it 3dplatformergame.exe? Sure, I'm going to turn off this option called Export with Debug because I'm not going to debug or try to troubleshoot any part of my game after exporting it. In fact, I've heard that this option will actually slow your game down, so turn it off if this is your final version of your game, you think. I'll go ahead and press save, and it'll export. There we go. If I go ahead and close this window and minimize Godot, it is here, my exe on my desktop. It has that icon that we converted to an ICO, the taller one. However, if I go ahead and double click on the exe, and when you know it, my antivirus is giving me a little bit of a warning here about this program. It's going to do a quick 30-second scan or so, and then it'll relaunch the program. So I'll just flip past that. And you can see our game is running on Windows without the Godot editor. I can go ahead and play my game. And as you can see, it's working pretty well. I can go ahead and jump and of course, collect coins in my game level. And I can't resize it because we didn't enable the user to be able to do that. There we go. That's how you export a Windows program, an exe, out of Godot. That's going to be it for this lesson, though. As always, thank you so much for watching and for making it to the end of this lesson. That'll be it for this one, though. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.